Example number 4. In the first book of Kings, chapter 7, we have a description of the temple and other royal buildings from the official compound of Solomon built in Jerusalem. Now, in this matter, there are lots of discussions, especially since in the 1990s, the Copenhagen School of Scholars, Thomas Thompson, Niels Peter Lemke, and others, dismissed the historical validity of these chapters in the Bible and said that not only that Solomon didn't build an official compound in Jerusalem, David and Solomon never existed, and they were made up by later generation people who wrote the text and left it for us. In the text there are lots of details of material culture. Some of them, the exact meaning of which escapes us. Some of them we do not have the exact meaning because those are ancient texts and we do not have too much connection to those ancient texts. In any case, in verse number 9 in the first book of Kings, chapter 7, we have a description of the nature of the stones and the construction of the royal buildings. And I read, Kol ele avanim yekarot kemidot gazit מגוררות במגרה מבית ומחוץ וממסד עד הטפחות ומחוץ עד החצר הגדולה. Now, many of the details of the construction, the royal construction of Solomon, many of the details exist in the fancy buildings of Iron Age II. Iron Age II is from approximately 1000 BC to 586 BC. Those are the days of the United Monarchy and the split monarchies, the 400 years approximately of the Davidic dynasty. Now, in the story of the Bible, in these verses, we have it very clearly that the buildings were built of ashlars. Those are stones which were not collected from the field, but stones which were quarried in a quarry. And they were, all of them, quarried according to certain size, midot gazit. Very interestingly, we have them megorarot b'megera. So there was a certain tooling of these stones. This term megorarot b'megera was escaped the attention of many of the translators, many of the interpreters. We have it that David put the Ammonite prisoners of war into forced labor. And what did they do in forced labor? They worked in the Megera. That means they polished the stones to eliminate the chisel marks from the face of the stone. And really, in the ashlar masonry of Iron Age, we have a fine type of tooling of the stones in which the face of the stone is as smooth as a baby's behind. It is very smooth to the touch, and all the remains of the chiseling marks, all of them were smoothed away. It is a very hard labor to do it, and it is a type of work which fits very much POWs, prisoners of war. In any case, the stones were nicely smoothed, and this is a phenomenon which does not exist in any other period, the smoothing away of the chiseling marks. In the continuation of the verse, we have it that all these nice stones, the ashlar blocks, were constructing the buildings, and they were nicely smoothed both on the outside and inside of the stones or of the buildings. And they were done so from the foundations unto the coping, michutz ad hachatzer hagdola, from the outside till the great court. The great court is one of the units of the official compound of Solomon. Now we have it, min hamasad ad hatfachot. What do you have in your translations?
From the foundation to the coping and so on outside to the great court.
Okay, from foundations to the coping. That is obvious, because this is how it would. But tefachot, which is the coping, is based on the tefach. Tefach is the width of 4 fingers. The width of 4 fingers, which is 1/7 of a cubit. A cubit is from the elbow to the tip of the fingers of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. It is 52.5 centimeters. That is the Egyptian royal cubit. We have it in the 2nd book of Chronicles, chapter 3, in the buildings of Solomon, described there in verse number 1, that Solomon built his buildings according to the old cubit, meaning that there were 2 standards of cubit, at least at the time when the text was composed. Actually, we have also in archaeology 2 uses or 2 different standards of the cubit. A standard of 7 handbreadths for a cubit, and a standard of a short Egyptian cubit with 6 handbreadths only. If the cubit is 52.5 and it has 7 handbreadths in it, 1 handbreadth would be 7.5 centimeters, approximately, about 7.5 centimeters. Now, we do not have buildings preserved to the coping, to the ceiling. What we have in archaeology is usually the foundations of buildings. On the other hand, we have burial caves which are well preserved from First Temple period, and they have the ceiling as well. In 1885, a French nobleman named Baron Ludovic Deveau, he has nothing to do with the very famous biblical scholar and archaeologist Roland Deveau. This French nobleman excavated north of Damascus Gate in the area which now belongs to the French Dominican Fathers. That is the French School of Bible and Archaeology, the École biblique et archéologique française de Jérusalem. In any case, he excavated there and found a burial cave. The burial cave was a very extensive, large cave, multi-chambered. It is, in fact, a rock-hewn version of a palace structure. In the antechamber leading to the burial chambers, the height of the ceiling was 3.6 meters, that is to say 7 cubits. The length of the chamber was 10 cubits, and the width of the chamber was 8 cubits. The proportion, the ratio of 10 to 8, that ratio of 10 to 8 appears also in the description of the stones mentioned in the first book of Kings for the construction of Solomon's buildings in Jerusalem. Now, very interestingly, at the meeting point of the ceiling and the walls, there was an angular cornice, like this one here. Any of you coming from Germany? No? This is what in German they call the Gesimsen. In any case, these angular cornice structures, which were at the meeting point of the walls and ceilings, they were in 2 steps. Altogether, they were projecting from the wall 7.5 centimeters. And their height was 38 centimeters, which is 5 times 7.5. In other places, in Siloam village, east of the city of David, we have burial caves with the same phenomenon, an angular cornice at the meeting point of the walls and ceilings. The height is either approximately 7.5 or 15, or 1 handbreadth or 2 handbreadths. In the very large cave in the French School of Archaeology of the Dominicans, we have 5 handbreadths. Now, what does it mean? Mimasad ad tefachot, from the foundation till the coping. What does it mean? Actually, during the construction of a building, you dig a foundation trench, and you put the foundation into that trench. On top of the foundation, you build the wall. Above the floor, you have 1 step between the wall itself and the foundation, which was slightly wider than the wall topping it. So there was a kind of a step at the bottom. On the other hand, at the top of the wall, they thickened the top of the wall in order to have a proper place to put the roofing beams on top. This widening was measured by the tefach, or by the handbreadth, tefach. By the way, we have it in the Hebrew language. We have very wide uses of this. Litpoach ala shechem is to have the 4 fingers put on somebody's shoulder or on his back. We have tipuach tinok, tipuach. One takes care of a baby with 4 hands. With 4 fingers, 4 fingers. So the 4 fingers are tefach, and the top of the wall was measured by the tefachot. We have it in archaeology very, very clearly. At the moment, in modern Israel, we have 2 banks. One Bank Masad, and the other one Bank Tefachot. If you go to each of the branches of these banks and ask them what is the meaning of the name of the bank, which comes from this verse in the first book of Kings, chapter 7, verse number 9, they are not going to be able to tell you. Actually, this is the small projection at the bottom of the wall and the small projection at the top of the wall. First projection at the bottom is the difference between the width of the foundation and the width of the wall on top of the foundation, and the projection on top is the result of the thickening of the wall towards the top part of it in order to have a proper place for the beams which formed the ceiling of the building. Any question concerning this?
Let me ask this question in an innocent way. Has anybody made guesses as to whose tomb that was on the grounds of the Kolbe? Which one of the Israelite kings?
Actually, that is a burial cave which covers more than 100 square meters, which is the dream of every young couple, to have an apartment in such a size. It has 9 burial chambers with burial benches and headrests for the deceased and repositories for collecting the bones of the deceased in order to make room upon the benches for the next generation. It has also an innermost chamber for the father of the family, and probably his 2 wives, and it has also a threshold at the entrance to the cave, what is called in French contre-seuil, or an inner threshold, which has 2 sockets for the hinges of a door which moved on hinges, which has parallels in the throne rooms of Assyrian kings in northern Iraq of today, and it has parallels also in some official structures of the Assyrians in Palestine. That cave was studied by your obedient servant and the late Amos Kloner, my friend. We studied it in the 1970s, and we fixed the date of that cave to the 8th or early 7th century BC. Beforehand it was dated to the Roman period without any foundation. My colleague, the late Amos Kloner, who passed away several months ago, he suggested it is a royal burial cave, and he suggested it is one of the tombs of the kings of Judah. I do not think so. I think that the kings of Judah, unlike the plebs, unlike the people, they were buried inside the city, while people, regular people, were buried outside the city. There was no Israelite burial within the cities, but with one exception, the kings. About David, it is very clearly written that he was buried in the city of David. And that burial place, the original burial place, served the kings of Judah from the time of David until the time of King Hezekiah, who was buried in the ascent of the kings of the house of David. Hezekiah's son, King Manasseh, was built in the courtyard of his palace in the garden of Uzzah. These are the 2 burial places of the kings of Judah. So we have the burial cave in the backyard of the Dominican fathers being a copy of a palatial structure, a rock-hewn copy of a building that existed in Jerusalem, a palace of some kind. And it helps us to reconstruct the palatial structures and also those mentioned in the first book of Kings to be built by Solomon. Am I clear?
If it's not a Judean king,
I don't think so.
tomb could it be?
I don't think so.
So who?
I don't think so.
But who was buried there?
some high-ranking official of the kingdom of Judah. We were spending much time in looking at every square inch of the walls of that burial cave, looking for inscriptions. We do not have any. Now, the cave itself was penetrated in the early Christian period, in the Byzantine period, during the time of Empress Eudocia, that is the mid-5th century of the Common Era. And they looted all the contents that was inside that cave. The remnants of the looting, which was most probably pottery, was thrown away by Baron Ludovic de Vaux, because he worked there 5 years before the discovery of the value of pottery for archaeology, before they knew that pottery is datable. So he threw away all the pottery. Very unfortunate. Those are the facts of life.